Over the past few days, we have been here on the island of Guadalcanal, looking at some of the actions that took place on this island in late 1942 and early 1943. And by mid-September of 1942, the 1st Marine Raider Battalion, under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Edson, had already had their baptism of fire. They had fought at Tulagi. They had been on a raid to a place called Tanambogo. And they got relocated to a place just south of Henderson Field that was supposed to be a place where they could get a little bit of rest. And the spot where they ended up is where I am standing right now. The Japanese called it the Centipede, but it would later become known to the Marines as Bloody Ridge. So the spot where I am standing right now is the southern edge of what would become known as Bloody Ridge, also known as Edson's Ridge. And just to kind of set up what was going on, you'd already had the actions at Alligator Creek. And off to our east, there was a brigade, the 35th Brigade, under the leadership of a guy named Kawaguchi, that landed unbeknownst to the Marines. They started getting reports from the locals and from some of the scouts in this area. So they sent out Edson and his raiders to do a scouting mission to see what was going on. When they got to the spot where the Japanese had landed, they found life jackets, they found guns, they found all kinds of equipment, and realized that there was a very large force that had landed off to the east of them and could be potentially on the move to attack them at Henderson Field. Following the Battle of Alligator Creek on August 21st of 1942, the perimeter held by the 1st Marine Division under General Vandegrift around Henderson Field was reinforced by the 1st Marine Raider Battalion and the 1st Marine Parachute Battalion. As they were settling into their new positions, the Japanese 35th Brigade, under Major General Kayutaki Kawaguchi, was making its way to Guadalcanal. On August 31st, Kawaguchi stepped ashore at Taivu Point and took command of the Japanese army at Guadalcanal. Reinforcing the Kawaguchi detachment was a 1,000-man force in the 124th Infantry Regiment, which landed west of the American perimeter under Colonel Oka, bringing the total number of Japanese troops on Guadalcanal to 6,200. As Kawaguchi began moving west towards Coley Point, a raid by the 1st Marine Raider Battalion was conducted in their wake at a place called Tanambogo. Here, Colonel Edson and his men found evidence that a large Japanese force had landed and was making their way to Henderson Field. The attack on Henderson Field that was planned by Kawaguchi was complex. His forces were divided into 5 battalions. 3 battalions of the main body would advance through the dense jungle and attack Henderson Field along a high ridge from the south. A unit called the Kuma Battalion would form the right wing and would attack Alligator Creek from the southeast to avenge the Ishiki detachment. And the 1,000-man force under Oka would form the left wing and would attack from the southwest. Knowing that an attack was imminent, Colonel Merritt Edson's raiders and the Paramarines dug in on the southern part of the ridge on September 12th, just as the Japanese were positioning themselves for an assault. All right, I'm going to take a moment to give an orientation as to where the American lines were on the first night of the Battle of Bloody Ridge. So right now, obviously, we're up on top of the ridge. We are facing to the north. This is the direction of Henderson Field. All right, so on the first night, well, the Marine Raiders were positioned right through here. So back over here in this direction, kind of going off over the edge, was C Company, and then coming right up through here and going kind of down the road a little bit was B Company, and then just over the edge was B Company of the Paramarines. And they were all facing in this direction, waiting for the assault from Kawaguchi. We're going to get back up to the Marine positions here on Bloody Ridge in just a moment. But first I want to walk down here and kind of get a view of things from the Japanese perspective. So I'm going to walk this trail here through some of this tall grass. Now, as I mentioned, Kawaguchi and the 35th Brigade landed off to the east of here. Let's actually back in this direction right here. 5-6 miles perhaps. And the Ishiki detachment had failed at Alligator Creek. Kawaguchi was going to do something different. Rather than make a full attack, right there on the eastern flank of Henderson Field, he was going to try and approach from the south. Okay, so this direction is east right here. So Kawaguchi is going to make his way all the way down through here. This would have all been thick jungle at the time. And the Japanese are going to be fighting the jungle, honestly, as much as they are fighting the Americans. And his three brigades his three battalions, are going to get all mixed up in here. Well, one of the battalions in the 124th Regiment is going to make their way through this valley. They're going to come around this knoll right here, and it's from down here in this low spot where on the night of September 12th, they are going to make their attack on the southern end of Bloody Ridge. I've just moved a little bit off the other side of the hill, and I'm going to divert from Bloody Ridge just for a moment to show you something that is kind of cool. So after the Battle of Bloody Ridge, well, obviously this area is going to be well protected by the Marines. And later on, when the 7th Marine Regiment lands here, well, there are going to be some of those guys who are going to be manning these trenches right here. And as you can see, we've got a bunch of pigtails and barbed wire that they set up when they were here on these lines. So this wouldn't have been here during the Battle of Bloody Ridge because those guys didn't have time to get all of this set up, but it is part of the history of this ground. One more quick thing from here, and then we'll get back to the actions from the Battle of Bloody Ridge. I mentioned that the 7th Marines occupied this position when they rotated in, and there was a famous picture that was taken right here of a Marine from L Company of 3rd Battalion, I believe, 7th Marine Regiment, who is sitting here with a Tommy gun. And you can see right here exactly where that photo was taken. Yeah, it's pretty cool to be right here all these years later, be in the exact spot where this Marine was. Okay, back up. I've moved over now to the right flank of the Raiders' position, and I mentioned that C Company was just over the edge. Well, they were positioned right down here in this flat that you see. So you've got Kawaguchi and his men coming up right through here, and they hit C Company right down in this flat on the night of the 12th. And C Company ends up falling back, and they get pushed back to kind of right here in this position, which really kind of fouled up the Marines' lines on the morning of the 13th.
And also, at the time of the battle, there's one existing now, but there was 2 lagoons. And C Company was basically put in platoon size, well, I'd say a platoon at that stage is about 20 men, platoon size clusters to cover avenues of approach. So at the time of the battle, avenue of approach was actually trails. So you had one on the Lunga, covering the Lunga, one covering one trail, one covering a trail below us. So when the Japanese attacked that night, using their infiltration techniques, they surrounded and cut some of these guys in C Company off. There was one log, and I forgot the veteran, he said when they were moving over, they had to cross the lagoon on a log. And he kept thinking, I may have to run across back behind this on this log, I hope I don't. But during the battle, they were. And to this day, I think there's 7 raiders still missing. And of those 7 raiders, there's probably 3 might be in the lagoon or in the lagoon area. So there has been expeditions to find them, but to this date they haven't. So the lagoon was down there, and the other lagoon is covered in now, but the original lagoon, one of them is still in this area. So they were cut off. They had to fight their way over that. So it, in pitch black nightness. So it had been pretty scary for them.
All right, so back over here in the C Company position, and there's another photo that was taken right here in this spot. You can see, with my phone it's a little bit difficult to make out, but you can see a guy looking through a scope over the Lunga River right here. Before we move on, there's one more thing up here that I wanted to show. The U.S. is going to lose a lot of soldiers and sailors and Marines in the Guadalcanal campaign, and the Japanese are going to lose a lot of men too. So this is a memorial that was set up by the Japanese to honor the soldiers of the 2nd Division who were killed here at Guadalcanal. So with C Company having fallen back, the front line here on the southern part of Bloody Ridge was kind of a mess. And Edson wisely made the call to pull everybody back and kind of tighten the lines up a little bit. But they couldn't do that during the daytime. So they waited until nightfall, and then these Marines started falling back to a place called the Middle Spur. And there's kind of a humorous story in the middle of this. One of the Marines, who was supposed to be one of the last ones through, jumps out of his foxhole. They're going down this spine of the ridge along this road, and as he's running to the Middle Spur, he looks to his left and he looks to his right, and he sees Japanese soldiers running alongside him. So he just kind of runs along with them in their assault, and at the first chance dumps off to the side. But the next big engagement was going to be at the Middle Spur. We've moved now to the Middle Spur of Bloody Ridge, and right now this direction right here that we are facing is south. Okay, so right there in that little clump of trees, that's where we started out on the southern end of Bloody Ridge. And on the night of the 13th, you got the Marines falling back right here along this ridge. And here on the Middle Spur is where they would have dug in. So this position right here is where Company B dug in, and then off just on the other side of those vehicles is where Company C would have been. And you can just imagine hundreds upon hundreds of Japanese charging these lines and slamming right into the Marines. Well, eventually the numbers were overwhelming, and these guys were all forced to fall back. C Company ended up falling back first, and then B Company followed them. And the spot that they fell back to was this hill right here. So now we are facing north towards Henderson Field. The Japanese are advancing in this direction. And I don't know how much you can tell it on camera, but there is one heck of a gully right here in front of us. So you would have had Japanese just storming through this low ground and then heading up to the high ground, trying to take out these Marines to make their way to Henderson Field.
I imagine it's down at the bottom. Because obviously that's where a lot of them died.
Well, Bill was saying they did a LiDAR sweep and they found an anomaly, so.
We have moved from Hill 1 to Hill 2. So this is what became the fallback position for the Raiders as they were kind of, trying to defend against this Japanese onslaught. And right here, well, just over this crest, this is where the Marines dug in. I've moved off to the left just a little bit, and again we are looking to the south here where the Japanese are attacking from. And after B and C Company of the Raiders fell back, well, Edson ordered for 2 companies of the Paramarines to come up here and basically launch a bayonet charge to drive the Japanese out of this ravine and up on this spur. And then if we walk back over here, I'm going to try to avoid falling in this giant hole. Well, between Hills 1 and Hills 2, there's a little knoll right here. So there were a couple of machine gun positions that were set up there. And then right here along this crest is where the Raiders were set up. Here on this point, you can see they have a memorial that is set up to the Raiders who fought here at the Battle of Bloody Ridge from the 12th to the 14th of September 1942. Here it says, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson commanded some 840 Marines of his 1st Raider Battalion and 1st Parachute Battalion who fought here to successfully defend this ridge for 2 consecutive nights from September 12th to the 14th. Now Edson, and we'll just walk over here real quick. Edson had moved his command post up. It was behind me, and right up here, again, this is where the Marines are dug in. Merritt Edson is right here. And at one point during the battle, the Japanese were, hollering out, and somebody on the American side thought that somebody was yelling gas. The word that the Japanese were screaming out sounded like gas in English. So there was a little bit of a panic that ensued, and of course there's smoke out here and everything. So some of these guys started panicking and falling back. Edson pulls out his pistol, starts waving it around and cursing at these guys and saying, the only thing that they have that you don't is guts. Now get back in your position. And through his leadership, the line is going to hold. Another guy who is going to provide some leadership here is a guy by the name of Ken Bailey. Bailey was wounded at Tulagi and was sent back to recover at New Caledonia, I think. I could be wrong on that. If I'm wrong, I'll put a note in the description. But I think it was New Caledonia where he was resting and recovering. Basically escaped from there and made his way back to his men. He'd been hit in the thigh, I believe, at Tulagi, but didn't have his boots. All he had was a pair of tennis shoes, and he is also going to be providing leadership, and both of those men would be awarded the Medal of Honor for their actions here. I do need to note, all of this during the battle was jungle. All of this burned out area was jungle. This right here was cleared out. Ken Bailey, unfortunately, would never know that he had been awarded the Medal of Honor because later on in this campaign, he was killed at the Guadalcanal.
Yeah, so obviously it's Marine determination and hard work and with the hand-to-hand combat and the weapons and everything that actually helped win this battle. But in the end of the day, it was the artillery that was the contributing factor, the force multiplier, you could say. So the Marines had 3 battalions of artillery. They were based just to the north here. I had the 105 battalion, which was at the airfield. You had a 75 millimeter howitzer battalion to the right, and you had one in direct support. When I say direct support, doesn't mean direct fire, but I'd say I'm standing on Hill 2 now, so I know you can't see, but just to the north, they had a whole battery of 4 75 millimeters, only about 400 yards away. So they had a lot of artillery going down. So in the first day, Pedro del Valle, which is the Colonel Pedro del Valle, he was the artillery commander of the 1st Marine Division. So he came up before day 1, and he helped pre-register all their artillery fire because they recognized how artillery could be a contributing factor here. So he assisted Edson and his forward observers, and they pre-registered all our artillery fire. So they pre-registered at 75 millimeters because the danger close areas on them are a bit closer, and then you can drop them in closer to the troops without endangering them so much. So they had the 75s registered right in front of us here. So I'm looking toward the middle spur, then I'm looking toward hill 1. So hill 1 is 600 yards away. So probably about 100 yards out until 600 with the 75s registered to the right and left to the Lunga. But on the other side, the 105s registered. And that really paid off because it struck the Japanese in their assembly points. And because the jungle channelized the Japanese, when they attacked, they didn't attack one massive wave. They attacked in small dribs and drabs. They attacked 50, 60, 70 to 100. That's why they did 6 assaults. But what they did, they had supporting columns, and they'd move in supporting columns. But what the American artillery was doing, especially the 105 millimeter howitzers, they were striking those supporting columns and destroying them before they even got to assembly points. One Japanese lieutenant said, "My platoon was destroyed before it even started by American artillery." The Japanese respected the American artillery a lot. So that was a contributing factor. And in fact, the night 2, the Americans brought their forward observers back. They didn't have any forward observers on the other hill. They still had the 105s pre-registered. And they could hear the Japanese screaming when the rounds would go over. So they said, "Fire for effect." That means we're striking them. So at the end of the battle, the 75s were landing. They just walked them back and forth. Edson says, start from 50 yards and just move it back to 400 yards and walk it back and forth. Because you can see the hill here, 50 yards in front of the forward trenches or the forward positions, back and forth and into the oncoming Japanese. And some of the artillery was hitting the Japanese so hard they sprinted through the artillery, just running straight into machine gun positions. So that's how the contributing factor of the artillery. It'd have been a big what if they didn't have it.
All right, so again, we are facing to the north towards Henderson Field, and after the battle, there was a guy by the name of Mike Winters who was the Jeep driver for the division photographer, a guy by the name of Sewell. And Sewell would have Winter go out and kind of pose for him. And there was a picture that was taken right here, and you can see Winter there on the right with the road going in the background. And then on the left, if you see kind of that scraped out mark, well, those are some foxholes. And here you can still see kind of where that area was. But yeah, that photo was taken right here. Now, Edson's position here on Bloody Ridge would hold, but there were Japanese soldiers who actually got around this position and infiltrated all the way to Vandegrift's command post. There was a Japanese soldier that was killed pretty much right at his feet. There's this entertaining story of the command sergeant major like chewing out this Marine, and a couple of Japanese soldiers make a charge on them, and he pulls out his pistol, shoots both of them, and then continues to chew out the Marine. But the fighting that would take place here on Bloody Ridge was about as violent as you can possibly imagine, and was going to give the Marines just a taste of what they would be facing in the upcoming battles in the Pacific War. But anyway, that was a little bit from right here on Edson's Ridge, also known as Bloody Ridge.